We are live. I am very excited to welcome Heidi Hackemer to the show. She is a strategy consultant, or as I said just before the show, a kick-ass strategy consultant who I worked with many more years ago than we probably want to admit. But we're very excited to have you on the program, Heidi, and we would love to hear what is on your mind.
What is on my mind? So I am coming to you from rural Pennsylvania. We moved here a couple of years ago after I was in New York City for over 20 years. And so I think the things that I'm thinking about a lot right now are this connection to things that are very tangible and that are very tactile. I live in the woods now. I go outside and I touch a tree. I might even hug a tree every once in a while, right? And I just finished this amazing book called The Light Eaters. That's all about this raging debate in botany about whether plants have consciousness and memory and all these like interesting human attributes. So I'm thinking a lot these days about our relationship to the things around us, as like indigenous cultures would call our relatives, that everything is a relative. I'm thinking about the things that you can touch. I'm thinking about community. I'm just thinking about how different I feel now that I'm not in the city so much anymore. And so these are things that are on my mind.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you're saying this like just as at this weird moment in history where like things are starting to get like weirdly more and more disconnected, right? You've got AI, you've got people I mean, I think isn't touch grass, isn't that like a thing that kids now say? Like,
yeah, they do.
Like because nobody is people have become disconnected. I don't know how are you sort of reacting to the technological changes then as you sort of move out of the city and into the
I mean, twofold. I mean, in one way, it keeps me completely connected. Like I don't feel very disconnected because even though I don't have neighbors here, I still very connected to the people that I love. But I think about it in many ways. So I come from the world of advertising, marketing, brand, that kind of thing. And I've gone through several waves of hysteria around technology. I remember back in the day when Google search started becoming a thing and everyone was like, oh my God, like no one's ever going to look at ads ever again because of search. And so I think we've gone through several rounds of technology anxiety, and some of it, or a lot of it is valid. It's not that it's invalid. So in some ways, I hold to the belief that there's just these primal truths about being human. There's primal truths about story. There's things that we are just wired, and those things persist even though the contextual technology changes. And yet, on the other hand, I do think AI is a little different. AI is mimicking what it is to be human, and so I'm a little less chill about AI maybe than I was about people, pretending the end of the world because of social media. But I still.
Well, it tells us that it's a little less chill about you. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know.
So you're talking about the tactile, and we're talking about how Jeff is mentioning that it kind of we're in this moment where things are sort of feel like they're moving a little bit away from that. But from an advertising and marketing perspective, how do you keep that tactile element or that real element in what you are promoting with your advertising and marketing? How do you keep that in a world where it feels like we're moving away from that? How do you bring that back into what you're doing?
Yeah. So in some ways I don't work as downstream marketing and advertising that much anymore. I'm working more upstream. And the reason I think the upstream work for me is much more gratifying is because I'm working with organizations to help them figure out what is your core story, where do you want to go, and how are we going to get there? And sometimes how we're going to get there, there's always a component of advertising and marketing, but I am not slinging content right now. And I think there's a real reason for that, because I don't find that to be personally gratifying. It does feel a bit false. It does feel a bit disconnected. And I couldn't live in that downstream space anymore because it was just doing something to me in my soul.
So I have a question on that. When you say I help various organizations, is it pretty prevalent for them to feel disconnected?
Yes, absolutely.
How does it manifest itself?
I mean, in the practical sense, I'm seeing a lot of research departments just not doing qualitative anymore. Like we all think we can shortcut qualitative by scraping by scraping spaces. And so I think actually it's really interesting. The research budgets have changed and they've been put in a different way. So you're not getting the stimulus inside of the organizations anymore that is tactile and human. And so then you can start to feel the disconnects in the organization. I know that seems like a simplistic way of talking about it, but really I'm such a big believer in fuel. What fuel are you putting inside of yourself as a human? And what fuel are these organizations putting inside of them? And as we see the fuel digitized and taken away from human connection, the organizations get more disconnected.
It's interesting because a lot of them put in social listening, but right in the social listening, you pick up the whole spectrum.
But social, like, what are we putting on social? Right? Like, am I putting what's really going on in my life in social? No, I'm not.
Exactly. Yes. And somebody is analyzing all of that and drawing conclusions. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah. But when I used to go meet people in their homes or go in their spaces and you spend real time with them. I'm not saying that I used to do research, like me as a researcher. I'm not saying that I would get to be their best friend, but I feel like I saw a lot more than just their social feed. Like you can tell a lot about a person by looking at the inside of their car, by looking at their bedroom, by looking inside of their refrigerator that you will never get on a social scrub ever.
Right.
I am getting a vacuum from my car like right away after you said that. I'm just kidding.
Exactly. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what's in my refrigerator?
What is in my car?
I'm sorry.
I'm throwing my kids under the bus.
Mine's covered in dog hair. So, I mean, our cars are probably in a similar state.
Yeah. Mine is also covered in dog hair. And for a while I had like this massive, like I had a box of pens that like the box like ripped open. And so there was just like, there's like 100 pens in my back seat. Whatever. It wasn't, it was a little bit of an explosion. But anyway, well, so I have a question for you that I think we've actually talked about with a number of guests, but a little bit of a different wrinkle talking to you. So, I mean, you've been a strategist in this, in the business world for a long time. Sorry. but it's interesting. I have this sort of view that one of the things that happened over the last, say, 25 years that I've been doing in this marketing world, in this strategy world, is that marketing, I feel like, has become almost like a technician field.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this interesting question of, as more automation and AI and technology can take over more of those technician jobs, does it actually free up, and bring back the strategic? Because, by the way, if everybody uses ChatGPT to come up with their strategy and their creative and whatever, then it will be crap, because everybody will have the same thing and it won't work. And so you're going to need a human being to kind of go, how are we going to do this differently? I don't know. I'm interested in your reaction to that.
So I think that there's going to be a premium version of strategy and a premium version of research that is human-based. But for some companies, they're not going to be able to afford that. And you could do a brand strategy on ChatGPT. There's no reason why you couldn't, right? It's not going to be as good as mine, but you can do it. Or it might be. I don't know. I mean, I haven't actually compared mine to ChatGPT brand strategy in the past, but I do think there is something about the touch of things. Like, I'm inside of a very large multinational organization right now, and the way that this strategy is getting developed is by conversation. It's sitting in rooms with leaders. It's talking them through it. It's getting the nuances. Maybe someday AI can replace that, but I don't think that can be replaced anytime soon. And that's going to be a premium version of the strategy, in the same way I think real, like, tactile research is a premium version of the inputs.
Interesting.
So Heidi, what kind of organizations do you tend to work with? Like, are these consumer packaged goods? Are they not-for-profits? Like, what are we talking about?
All of it. I've worked in non-profit. I've worked in public, consumer. I've worked in everything private sector. I've worked in nonprofit. I've worked in government. I've worked in philanthropy. A lot of the tools stay the same from organization to organization. So yeah, all of it, really.
Yeah. So I sort of skipped over when I introduced you. I skipped over sort of the title of this episode, but the title is The Power of Story, How Getting the Fundamentals Right is Critical to Scaling. And I'm interested if you could maybe share with us kind of, you've talked a little bit about this idea of story, but how do you think about story and its relationship to business?
It's critical. I mean, you cannot lead a business without a story. You can't. I've seen leaders try, and then they come to me crying at some point. And sometimes it's like, sometimes my work is almost like, executive therapy, because they're like, why are my teams going all over the place? Why aren't we pulling against a singular vision? Why do we have so much waste? Why are these guys fighting with each other? And the first question I'll ask is, well, what story are you telling them? Like, what is their why? And a lot of times, especially in early stage organizations that are scaling very quickly, that's not where they put the investment. And I get it, right? Like, you're trying to get a business off the ground, and putting, the money that you need to get someone like me to come in to be like, let's make sure your story's straight and you're doing it correctly. I understand the reason that doesn't get invested in. I think there's two reasons it doesn't get invested in. One is because a founder in the beginning usually has a really good story that people are rallying around. So really early days of a company, people are like, yeah, let's go. And they're tight, and the founder is touching everybody. And then it starts to grow. And there's always this phase when it goes from like the founder's fight to like proper like stage 1 scaling, where at the end of that stage 1 or stage 2 scaling, the executive team looks around, is like, oh my God, our internal culture is all over the place. We're slowing down, we're hiring the wrong people. And then someone like me gets called in those moments.
But it's interesting, because it's just about every startup goes through it. There's very, very few that do a conscious job of over communicating and sticking to their story. Most everybody sacrifices that for growth, scaling.
They do. And I think they get busy. I think it worked in the beginning. And so they're trying to do the same things. Like, I don't understand why it's not working. So I don't think it's often a conscious rejection. I think it's more, the wheel starts turning, and all of a sudden you wake up one day, you're like, oh my gosh, wait a second, this is broken.
Right.
And often you're driving the story with what's driving revenue, and how do you revenue becomes, the whole game. I mean, actually, with venture capital, it's often like explicit. You either grow, or you're getting beaten up by your VC board all the time, right?
You know what the interesting thing is, Eric, is a lot of times I get brought in because of the board. The VCs are like, get your shit together. And so a lot of times it's the advisors or the board that say to the team, you got to fix this. Bring someone in. So that's interesting to me too. There comes a point where the board starts to demand it.
So we actually got a comment, which we are always excited when we get a comment, and I will read it to you in a second. But before I do that, I actually wanted to just because it sort of moves us into a slightly different area. As the other thing I think that's interesting that we've seen a lot is this idea of the founder does have the story, but the story is in their head, and they know. But what happens is they get into this mode of like, but nobody else knows. So I have to be in every sales meeting. I have to, basically write all the articles and do all the marketing and do all the stuff. And they get frustrated, and they're sort of constantly hiring and firing people. They just don't, quote, get it. And so I think it's an interesting thing, because I think the other failure mode is we get too big and the story starts to get lost. And the other failure mode is we never get big, because the founder doesn't feel like they can translate that story to everyone else. I don't know if you see that, but that's something I feel like I'm seeing all the time. So.
Something that I realized like about a year ago was story and strategy is the ultimate act of democratization of power. Mm-hmm. And what often happens in these companies is that you have a founder that gets it. I've interacted with companies where there's a group that gets it. Mm-hmm. And then that group has to make a very cognizant choice of, will I relinquish the power and create the story in a way that other people can use it? Or some people like to hold on to the power and make sure it's always going through them.
Yeah.
But story is democratization.
So I don't know if have you ever read a book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman?
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine, but she has this amazing analogy that I actually think really she talks about it in terms of people inside of organizations, but I actually think it's actually quite common that this is true of the founder or the small business leader. She calls a diminisher, a leader that doesn't sort of get the multiplicative effect. And analogy for that leader of one brain with many hands. And I think that's what we're talking about, is like, how do I activate all those other brains? And the way to do it is to make sure that we all understand the same story. So it's just sort of a fascinating, cross between sort of the, leadership work that I'm involved in, and also the sort of the business stuff that you're talking about is fascinating. I mean, it's really both, right? You can't really separate the leadership work from the business work. Well, I don't want to lose track of this. So somebody left us a comment that I think it's not just true for growing startups, but also for big organizations as well. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts, like, what is it, we talked a little bit about how not having stories sort of limits growth. How does this play out in your experience in large organizations?
I mean, I was just with my client this whole week. That's a big ass organization. So, a couple ways, like you start to get sub stories, you start to get tentacles that are moving in different ways. It can be, and it's really hard to unbake, right? Like, the nice thing about startups is that, okay, you got some batter, you can add an egg here, you can add some chocolate chips into it, and then you can make the cake, whatever you need to do. Right. It's tough when you're dealing with a baked cake and you have to kind of undo it. So I think it's even, I mean, the bigger the organization, the more critical the story is, and the more difficult it is to get it through the organization.
Well, so interestingly, I think there's this phenomenon that, where leadership often blames the next level down for not implementing the vision, right? Like, this is a common theme. They don't know how we're hiring the wrong people, whatever. And I think you sort of alluded to that concept. Is it usually the wrong people, or is it the wrong story, or the wrong message, or is it kind of like, or was it the wrong story and that's why they hired the wrong people? I mean, how does that all work together?
I always think of the story. I always say, like, so I think of brand as a story, just to be overly simplistic. And a brand should be the operating system of a company. And that operating system should drive all of the decisions that you make. It should drive who you hire, what you invest in, how you do performance reviews, what you make, how you make it. And so, if you have a certain story that we're going to go be these badasses in the world, then you better hire badasses. But if you're going to be a story about, we are going to provide security, or we're going to provide like knowns to people in the world, then you're going to hire different types of people to do that. So I really think the story and the people are very connected.
Yeah. It's interesting that you sort of bring this up, as I often sort of, I don't know, I don't think I made this up, but this idea that like suggesting that brand is just a marketing, belongs to the marketing function, always seems to be a disaster. And I have been in companies where that is the view, right? We'll do operations over here and you do marketing over there. And the level of resistance that you get from people sometimes when you try to say, no, we actually all have to, like, I used to say, when I worked in the restaurant world, we used to say, it's our job to inspire our employees to deliver the experience we promise to our guests, right? Yeah. And that idea is like fundamentally, the second half is about the marketing and the first half is about the operations. And if you split them up, what you end up with, actually was just talking about this I teach marketing in my marketing class yesterday, this idea that if you don't, that if you don't deliver on the promise that you just made in your advertising, it's actually worse than not making any promise at all, or right, because now I've just created an expectation and then not delivered on it. So yeah, I mean, that really resonates with me. I hadn't really necessarily thought about it in terms of story, but I think what you're saying is exactly right.
Yeah.
That it's, what is the story we're telling, and how well does it get translated across an organization that sometimes has tens of thousands of people?
And that's where I think sometimes we fall short. I mean, here's the thing, like writing a brand strategy, writing a brand story is not hard. It's not.
Right.
The hard thing is operationalization. And the operationalization is a tremendous, if we're doing it right, we are doing a tremendous act of empathy. Because if you're working with an organization, say, for example, that you get the hardcore supply chain people, or you get the engineers, or you get the people that run the factories, or the people that are working in the factories, if you really want to be successful in this work, you've got to be incredibly tuned to what do they care about? How do they speak? What's their nomenclature? What are their modes of taking in information? And so sometimes when I'm doing a rollout through a company, you will have the same story packaged in 10 different ways because different audiences need to hear it in different ways. And I think these things fail, like especially with an engineering organization, which I've worked in plenty of engineering organizations. You come out with a razzle dazzle like marketing story and they're like, oh God, because you're not speaking their language. You're not. And so you have
that guy.
To know what they care about, right? And
also, they see brand, like Jeff said, belonging in marketing.
Right.
And you are telling them, no, brand is what we live by. It's our goal.
And that has to come from the CEO or the leader. Like that is also one of the reasons why this fails. Whenever you have a CMO or director of brand or whatever who's trying to push it up through and trying to convince everyone, if you don't have the CEO behind you, not going to work.
I have lived that problem. Absolutely.
And that plays out in a lot of ways. I mean, there used to be an HR person that said like the only bullies that are in the company are there because the CEO is allowed. In other words, like the CEO permits those bullies to be there. So the culture is set by the CEO, the message is set by the CEO, and if they are not living it and driving it, and I've seen a lot of, because I've worked in smaller companies, I've seen a lot of CEOs who sort of put their finger up to the wind, and they sort of particularly if they're trying to raise money or whatever, and they just say, well, they asked us this question, let's change what we're doing now, and then change another thing or whatever, and there's just no core, so nobody really knows what to do with that.
Yeah, that's confusing and hard.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I actually think, CEOs come from every function, right? I mean, you have CEOs that were CFOs or COOs or whatever, and I think there's this sort of, sometimes there's this view when somebody's come up through the finance ranks, they're like, yeah, I don't get any of this stuff. This brand stuff is stupid. It's just a waste of money or whatever it is. And it's like, you don't have to buy into it as a, like, this is the most important thing, but you had better tell everybody else that they are going to need to buy into it, or you are going to be, actually, I take that back. I think you do need to buy into it. And if you don't, you probably don't have any business being a CEO, because the company will drift, right? You will end up with, I've been in companies where, we tried to do exactly like you said, the CMO and the marketing organization was trying to take an idea and permeate it through the business. And the resistance came from like the weirdest places. We had almost everyone aligned, but one person who went to the CEO and essentially said, I don't buy into this. And that killed the whole thing. And if the CEO had at that moment just said, no, buy into it, you're going to do this, everybody else is on board and you're just going to have to live with it. That would have been a totally different thing. And I think, so I absolutely have seen what you're talking about. All right. So we promised that ChatGPT would jump in. You're like, I forgot about that, right? So I always ask two questions. I usually ask ChatGPT. Actually, today ChatGPT is on vacation, so I'm asking Perplexity. And so, would you like absurd or thought-provoking first?
Let's do absurd. My brain's tired. It's been a long week.
If you could turn strategy into a sport, what would it be and why?
Rugby.
The first thing that's
Notepads, Kyle.
the first thing that's coming to mind is soccer or football, like soccer, European football, because it's a little bit fierce. It can be a little bit brutal at times, but you have to do it as a team. And if you don't do it as a team, it doesn't work.
I love that. I was just talking about this the other day. Like I was saying, like, have you ever watched little kids play soccer?
Right. Well, like everyone goes to the wall.
Right.
Right.
It's like if there's no strategy, you're not really playing the game. All right. All right. This one's probably a little more thought provoking. Is what's the most ridiculous strategy you've ever been asked to implement, and how did you politely decline?
Oh shit.
Is that what you said? Oh shit.
God, I mean, I never get to
drop the mic and be like, I'm done with this.
Well, so let's change it up a little bit. What's the most ridiculous thing you've been ever asked, in working on a strategy, and how did you politely decline?
Well, you know what I find to be ridiculous are things that are boring. That's what I find to be ridiculous. So ridiculous to me is let's get people to buy 2 of these a year instead of 1 of these a year. Like, no, come on. No, that's ridiculous. Like, no, that's ridiculous. That's boring. That's what I decline. I decline that shit, I don't decline this. Like this last summer, I was working with a psychedelic venture firm where when I was telling people I was working with them, people were like, what? And they're like, that's crazy. I'm like, no, it's interesting. It's really interesting. So right. I think it's your
wait, before you go on, what does it mean, a psychedelic venture firm? Like they're on mushrooms or they're selling mushrooms?
No, it's a firm it's an investment firm that really believes in the power of psychedelics, and they are trying to accelerate the adoption and delivery of it globally.
But you're talking about like for recreational
for healing, for like mental health healing, because like it's interesting. There's some really interesting research around this, and there's some research that counters it, right? So like we have to be fair and we have to say that, but it's an interesting area. So for me, ridiculous is getting people to consume more shit that they don't need. And yes, sometimes I do work on projects like that, so I don't want to act like I'm a total purist, but I like turning those down and then work on the things that other people might think are a little strange or weird.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, cool.
Well, I like you've stunned us into silence.
I know. I'm like, well, there's
just like, how do we respond to the psychedelic venture capital?
No, I want to chime in a little bit. I think the premise of it is very interesting because a lot of what we see in business is truly, instead of buying 1 cup, let's make people buy 2. Let's make people eat whatever cookie we make, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Let's merge categories, right? So when it comes to true innovation, there is few and far between, right? And what I think we, people who work in business, will all need to be more committed to true innovation because there are unsolved problems.
Yeah. For some reason, by the way, the thing that's coming to mind for me is the movie Something About Mary. Do you all remember this movie where this guy's like, 8-minute abs? I have a great idea. We're gonna sell 7-minute abs. That's just like
exactly. Or the one that like it's all these stupid TikTok products. Like the other day I saw something like, let's make the ice mold so you have the ice that fits right into your Stanley cup. And I'm like, the world does not need fucking ice molds for Stanley cups. It does not need that. It does not need that. Like
so it's funny you say that because I was literally in my marketing class just this week talking about positioning, and I was saying that fundamentally positioning starts from a paint point. And then I was talking about how I was talking about the 4 P's of marketing, and I was saying that that the promotion P is most related to the need identification stage and the awareness and consideration stage. So sort of tying the 4 P's to the customer journey. And I literally, while I was talking into my class, I had this sort of thought, because I was saying, sometimes in the need identification phase, you are communicating through your promotion. You're trying to like help people sort of identify a need they have. And I said, in other times, you're actually trying to convince people that they had a need that they didn't really realize. And I'm like, I had this thought, I'm like, wow, that, like, I guess I probably knew this, but I'm like, that's sort of like a line to cross, right? In terms of like the sort of the, like, to your point, it's like, am I doing this to convince people they have needs that they don't really have, or am I doing it to help people solve problems they really have? And I think there's a real, point of,
Don't you
difference.
don't you think like 80% of marketing and advertising is getting people to buy shit that they don't need, minimum?
Yes, because somebody put a business objective to you, right? So it's option 3, because I need to grow my business, whatever I committed for the fiscal.
But
Yeah.
By the way, I think like you brought up Yeti, and I'm not complaining about Yeti as a or you lifted up your Yeti mug, but I think the way that they've, well, actually Stanley, I think, has done it, is they've convinced the 12-year-olds that they need Stanleys. That's how they've been driving it.
$50
You can't
up.
convince the adults, convince their kids that they need it.
And then they have a shelf where they're showing off 20 different colors of Stanley. And I don't want to like attack the Stanley people. We all do it in our own way. And
right.
we are in these endless pressure for growth in a finite planet that has finite resources. Like something's got to give at some point.
Well,
So,
and
Dr. Kim Allen just chimed in. Thanks. Our friend Kim says, "What size organization do you prefer to work with?" So let's hear your thoughts on that.
I it's not the size of the organization anymore. It's the people that I'm working with. And I know that sounds super trite, but as Jeff has alluded to, I'm getting old. I'm 46 years old. I've been doing this for over 20 years. And like when I was young, when I was younger, it's all like, like when I was younger, it's like, oh, it's the hot organization or the big organization. And like, I went down those paths. Now it's like, are these people assholes? Okay, no, I'm not working with you. Like, no, like life is short. Life is short. So I have really amazing people I'm working with in a massive organization. I have really amazing people that are like a 3-person organization. I don't care about the size. I don't. It's like, who are you working with? Who's taking up your time during the day?
Yeah. Dr. Kim,
Kim's response was, by the way, Kim's response was 46 question mark.
Good way or a bad way?
You have the same reaction I did. I don't know how old Jeff and Elena are. Actually, I do know how old Jeff is, but
you should know how old Jeff is, right?
That was a good one, Eric. We will remember that one.
What was it? That was that thing that it was the joke of like, it's a bad day if your twin brother forgets your birthday.
Yeah, we should just send Kim the link so she can join in. She said her response was, "You are an embryo."
She's told me that I'm an embryo as well, so I take that.
I love it. Thank you, Kim, for the humor. And but we have come to the end of our half an hour and then some. And as we warned you, we will go around and ask everybody to give one thing they want to leave the audience with. What I never tell people in the intro, the pre-show intro, is that you're going to get to go first as the guest, so you don't have any time to think about it. So it's kind of just my mean-spiritedness, and so.
Were you the first one?
What is it that you want to leave the audience?
Isn't the first twin that came out like the mean one, and then the second one's the nice one, or something like that? Okay, great. I would say I'm gonna be thinking. I mean, I've been thinking about it for a long time, but like just that clarity of like what is the definition of ridiculous?
I love that. I'm going to be thinking about that for days now. Well, so Heidi, before I do my one thing, what is the best place for people to connect with you or reach you?
LinkedIn.
Awesome. LinkedIn is a good place to be. You, by the way, Heidi, posts the amazing posts, and they just, I'm just like always in awe of just the explosion of people just clicking on your posts, because I always see them and I'm like, wow,
Awesome.
So It's great. So yeah, definitely in your fan club. My one thing I think is just to build on the idea of this episode, which is just this idea of the power of story and how much story is truly, so fundamental to business and to everything we do. I sometimes say, like, humans are a storytelling animal. That's what makes us fundamentally different from basically any other animal that's out there. And
Except for ChatGPT.
except for ChatGPT tells the same story that we tell. Just it's like a parrot. Anyway. Anyway, but yes, I think story is an amazing sort of way of sort of understanding what kind of makes the world go around, what drives and motivates human beings. And that if you forget about that in the business world, you end up with multiple different ways of failing. So I will pass it over to Elena.
Yes, and I'll pick it up right there. And I would say the importance of brand being the company-owned term rather than something that's pigeonholed in marketing and you do it part of the time because you lead generate and you promote and you sales enable and whatnot. It really is the essence of what the company does.
And my one thing, I'm really captivated by your analogy to in response to ChatGPT or whichever one of the services you Perplexity, that soccer is the sport that you use, that it's a team sport, that it's a team sport in a particular way, right? So with basketball, you can have like the superstar who just dominates or whatever, but with soccer, this just doesn't work in that way. You still need everybody to be working, working together. And I think that's a really interesting analogy. And having spent most of my career in small companies and watching that transition you were talking about, sometimes not go well, of transitioning from the founder vision to the team vision. I think that's a really interesting analogy. Yeah, I think that's it's been a fascinating episode, Heidi, and we really thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Be well.